So he says that then they use this as a language as a weapon in the same way that Hume uses his distinction as a weapon, right? The logical positivist version of Hume's fork was known as the verifiability criterion. And it became a fearful weapon wreaking havoc, as Hume might say, right, among philosophy departments throughout Europe and America. The verifiability criteria convinced a significant portion of the academic community that traditional philosophy, what the logical positivists called metaphysics, was dead, right? It was over with. It was just a game with language, and it was meaningless, and so we don't need to do that anymore. Right? We can throw that out. And, of course, theology oftentimes is part of the area of metaphysics, and so you can throw out theology as well because, again, is it empirically, are those questions empirically verifiable? No. Are they true by definition? No. Well, as Hume would say, commit them to the flames.
Yeah. This gets rid of the God of the gap, or anything where you're using God did it, or Satan did it, or whatever the little demons in the clock make it slow down, and that's why you have to wind it back up again. So it's removing all that and just looking for either a visual observation that can be displayed to others, and they can go out and do similar experiments or check the findings, or it's a matter of definition where you're applying key definition or logic to discovering new things through the use of that logic.
Yeah, and so he gives us an example here. He says that the logical positivists were more philosophically Spartan than even Hume, right? And so he says, take, for example, the problem of the external world. Now, most people would not see the external world as a problem, right? They would see that as the answer.
Unless you're a philosopher, then you see it as a problem,
So notice, all right, so the problem of what is that? So whereas Hume believed it to be a genuine philosophical problem, right? That is, how do we verify, or does the external world exist, and how do we come to the conclusion that it does? How do we argue for that? So whereas Hume believed is this to be a genuine problem, one that revealed real and troubling limitations on human knowledge, the logical positivist dismissed the problem of the external world, right? Is there an external world, and how do we argue for it? As a pseudo problem, right? Merely disguised as substantive philosophy. And so, after all, there's no empirical difference, and this is the key point, right? There's no empirical, that is physically, sensory, a way to examine. There's no empirical difference between a matrix-type scenario and the ordinary world, right? So the question is, are we living in a matrix, or is this the ordinary world? Well, the logical positive says there's no empirical difference. There's no way to determine the difference. If you're in the matrix or in the ordinary world, they're both our physical, our sense perceptions are doing the same types of things, right? And so since that's the case, according to empiricism, we can't rationally choose between the two. The logical positives then said that there's no problem. In other words, both scenarios are logically equivalent. Both the matrix scenario and the ordinary physical real world are logically equivalent, and so there's no problem.
Man, where would physics be without the matrix movie? Because you can think of this as one of two ways. If you're kind of the traditional philosopher, you want to say, well, it does make a difference. Like look at what the matrix says is we care about being in the real world, and we care about being in this dystopian world where we're scrounging and we're eating porridge, and that's the real world, and that's what we care about, and we took the red pill. But at the same time, if you die in the matrix, you die in the real world. It doesn't matter if the bullets are real or not. They still have the same. You having a bullet in the matrix is just the same as having it in the real world, and it doesn't matter if it's a computer program. So they're logically
equivalent, right?
Yeah.
Death.
Yeah. So death or running into the tree, you still bump into something. When you're fighting somebody, you can fight them in the real world or in the matrix. It doesn't matter. So if the outcome is the same, that little portion of is this reality is something that it doesn't bring you anything different.
Right. It doesn't add to anything, right? And so Stokes tells us, so instead of solving this problem of the external world, the logical positivist dissolves it, is what he says, right? And of course, knowing Stokes, he has a quip about that, right? So his quip is, you'd be excused entirely if you think they merely swept it under the rug.
Yes, right.
So logical positive also convinced most of the academic philosophy that any reference to God is literal nonsense. They regulated all moral discourse as well, right? Murder is wrong, is merely expresses our emotions about we don't like murder, right? Bad murder, right? I don't like it, So religious and ethical discourse say nothing true or false about the world. And so it was meaningless. Scientific and mathematical discourse, on the other hand, are not only meaningful, but the surest way to genuine knowledge. So religious and ethical discourse are meaningless because they don't say anything true about the world. You can't verify them empirically, and they're not true by definition. And so it's just like Heidegger's expose on nothingness. They are meaninglessness with regard to what they tell us.
You can continue to talk about nothing outside of there, but we now control the hearts and minds of the future generations of scientists and philosophers.
Right.
And so the rational positives are like we could liken it to Spock, but more so because Spock had a half human side, and so there were elements where the unrational part tend to creep in.
That's right, sneak in, pop up its head a little bit.
But it's really fun always going through old Star Trek, the best Star Trek, and picking that out and saying, well, is burning the last bit of fuel to hopefully in the hopes of alerting the Enterprise that they're adrift in space, or would it have been better to live for 3 hours longer by continuing on? Well, then you go, was that a kind of a hopeful shot of faith and or an act of desperation, or was it the most logical thing to do?
Right.
And so here they would say there's no faith, there's no this was the out of all the options, this was the most logical thing to do, and it got a desired outcome. So even if God exists, whether or not God pointed the Enterprise at the exact same spot to see the trail that alerted them to the shuttlecraft being out of fuel, then it doesn't matter, because assuming God doesn't get you anywhere in that type of argument.
Yeah, right.
Although we would want to argue against that, and so there is arguments that we will get into, just not completely in this chapter.
Right, and so he says their positive or constructive project was to study the rational methods of science, right, which included logic and mathematics as tools in hopes of limiting the pursuit of truth to those methods. So if we want to get at truth, we only look at logic and mathematics. That is, those scientific types of things that they said, right? Philosophy, according to the logical positives, was limited to these two projects and nothing else. So if you were doing philosophy according to the logical positivists, you're only doing logic, mathematics, and that sort of empirical verification, stuff like that, right? So this became known as the analytical school in philosophy. Right. And so metaphysics was kind of pushed to the side.
Yeah.
And so for a large part of the 20th century, at least the beginning of the 20th century, in philosophy departments, they kind of split. And so you could study comparative religion, but not religion as a philosophy discipline, right? And so religion and questions about the God and that sort of thing, faith, all those types of things were pushed out of the academy to a certain extent anyway. And so the only way you get it is to study comparative religion, right? but it's no philosophical
and that's
issues.
more of a social you're looking at people groups and their belief systems and how it impacts the world or the culture or the society. You're not really saying the religion of Thor, is bringing about a truth claim. Right. You're just saying, those who believe in Thor tend to war and rape and kill because they're going to be rewarded as warriors.
Nothing against Thor.
At the end.
Nothing against.
Well, not the new Thor, the new loving kind Thor. The Old Testament Thor is the mean Thor.
That's
so
right.
yeah,
That's right. Not the New Testament Thor.